In these tutorials, we are going to introduce file handling. So this is something quite new, and it's a bit different than some of the other things we've done. And in this video, we're going to look at how to, specifically how to write to text files. So basically, file handling allows us to save data from our Python file, whether that's variables, input-output, a list that you've built, whatever it is, any kind of data. It allows us to save that to an external text file. And then it also allows us to get data from external text files and use it in our Python program. So you can imagine this is really important within programming. Any kind of external data you want, whether that's some kind of science experiment, if it's data you've collected online, any kind of data, we can use that in our Python program to run calculations, to read it, to make sense of it, whatever that might be. And up to this point, if we've calculated something in Python, so we've saved it in a variable, maybe we've returned it as a function, as soon as our program ends, all that data is lost, and this allows us to keep data in the long term. So basically, how it works is you have a Python file, so in this case, writing to files.py, all right? And we'll look at what the code actually looks like in a second. But when you write that Python file, it'll create another text file in that same folder. So when we run this writing to files.py, let's say we tell it to write, this is my message, it'll create a text file called myfile.txt, you can see there, with this is my message in it. And you can imagine that even when this Python file closes and the program stops running, this text file will still exist. It's saved in secondary storage rather than RAM, and that's in that long-term storage where you can use it. So let's look at how we can write to these files. So when I say write, I mean add information to. So this is the first example. It's always going to be these three steps. It is always open, write, and close. So when we open, the first thing we create, you're creating an object, and this is something you'll learn in A-level. But here we're opening our file. So it's always file equals open, and then these are strings, so that's why they're in speech marks, and we've got myfile.txt. That is the name of the text file, and then W is our mode, and that stands for write. We'll look at some different modes later on, but it's for writing, it'll always be a W for write or an A for append. And this is how we open our file. Now that we've got our file open, we can write to it. So the file is already open, we've created it with the equals, then we've got file.write, and this is the message that we're writing, and then that's the second line. Now notice this backslash here, that will put a new line in, like hitting the enter key, and it just allows you to put things on different lines. And then finally, we have to close our text file. So we've got file.close. This just makes sure everything saves properly, and it's really, really necessary. Again, you'll learn why when you get to A-levels with object-oriented programming, but file.write and file.close are methods, so we put brackets after them, and just make sure you don't forget those brackets on the close, it's very common. So when you run all this code, so it opens your file, it creates it if it does not already exist, it writes the message to that file, and then it closes the file. So here it'll say, this is my message, and this is the second line, and you can see it's called it myfile.txt, and that's myfile.txt here. So it's a separate file, and it's just saved data to an external file. So as I mentioned, there are two different modes of writing to text files. So we saw earlier the W, and W means write. When you open a file in mode W to write, it'll overwrite any files with that name. So if we've already created a myfile.txt, and we've put loads of content in it, if we then do this and we write to it, it'll overwrite whatever's there, so we'll lose all that data, and it will replace it with whatever we write to next. If there aren't any files already with that name, it'll just create a new one. The A stands for append. Think like an appendix in a book, it's at the end. If you open a file in mode A, it'll add to any files with that name already. So if we've already got a myfile.txt, it'll just continue adding on to the end. But same thing as W, if there aren't any, it will create a new file. And I should say with the A, even if you open it in mode A, your next line will still be file.write. You never, ever, ever do file.append. So both of these would be followed by file.write, and they just open it in different modes. Great, so let's look at some examples of doing this live. So this first one, I am going to, let's just write to a file called animals.txt and add two animals on separate lines. So, right, so first thing, we're always going to open the file first. So file equals open. My file is called animals.txt. and I'm going to write to it. So I've got .w. Now I could do a because that doesn't exist already, so it's not going to make a difference, but let's just go ahead and write to it. Now, let's start by just writing one animal to it. So file.write, giraffe say, and then we always are going to close our file at the end. So file.close, and just make sure you remember those brackets. That's quite a common mistake. So we've opened our file, we've written to our file, and we've closed our file. Now, if we go ahead and run this, you will see we've got a file called animals.txt. And when I open that, I've got a giraffe in that text file. So that's worked correctly. Now, let's start again. So let's delete that. And we could override it, but we'll just do it properly here. So I've opened our file. If we want to write two animals, let's start by here. So let's add file.write, let's say cat, right? And if I run this time, we've got animals.txt, and notice it's got giraffe cat, so that has worked correctly, but now we want them on separate lines. So just so you can see what will happen, I'm going to keep this W here, and that will overwrite that file. So now, to write them on separate lines, I need to do giraffe, and it's this /n, and that's our new line character. Careful with which slash you're using. It should be that one, and that should give us a new line. Let's just double check that has worked. So it should overwrite our file, and you can see here we've put them on separate lines now. So that's worked correctly. Now, let's say I want to append to this instead. So I'm gonna add, let's get rid of that line, and I want to add, what's another good animal? Shark. I want to add shark to my file, so I'm going to have a new line before the shark because we didn't finish with one, and then add shark, and when I run this, my animals.txt is now giraffe cat shark. Okay, now I can use my file to do anything I want to, so if I want to do another one, I can make a new file. Let's say file.open sports.txt. I'm going to write to it. I'm going to write basketball. And then I'm going to close my file. Now notice when I run this, no problems. It just creates another text file called sports.txt, which is separate to my animals file. So you can see it creating these external files here. And that's kind of what you need to know about writing to text files. It's always going to be the same: open, write, and close.